thing about Simplay is it's really more of a medium for which people can build things onto. When I was starting my research into the whole autism space, I came across these places called sensory environments. Simplay was kind of trying to simplify what those sensory environments brought to education and sort of make them more portable and simplified. So the projection is kind of making up for all of those different sensory stimuli that would be available in those rooms. But really what Simplay can do is it can track the motion and it can track the voice. So you can talk to the machine. So in one instance, it could be somebody simulating a conversation with an avatar, and you could like talk through scenarios. Like a common thing that therapists do with kids with autism is they'll run through short stories, maybe a 3-panel comic, and it's perhaps this one's about sharing. So, Mikey wants to play with Tim and Duncan, and he just grabs the ball. How do you think Tim and Duncan will react if Mikey just grabs the ball without asking? And then you talk to the kid about, oh, would he be upset? Would he be happy? Would he be, frustrated? And you kind of play through the scenarios in order to kind of prepare them for day-to-day life. So that could be an example, is like playing through a scenario, but through the Simplay. So maybe it's a taking the bus routine, or it's brushing your teeth routine.
Right.
Or it could be even, drawing in virtual space, using your fingers as like the paintbrush. So that was something that I was able to code for the demo at the grad show, and that was a really popular activity that people like to do. There was one person's grandma who was like an artist back in, paintbrush and paint artist, but she got into it and she was really focused on getting the perfect image with her finger, and it was so cute to see her kind of, and that was the other thing that really struck me, is like how intuitive gestures are. People just instantly kind of grab them, versus trying to teach somebody how to use a controller, or how to teach somebody how to use a computer setup, keyboard, and mouse. It was just gesture controlled, so it was really intuitive.
Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity, clever, inventive, and original thinking. My name is Ken Tenser, CEO of SpyderWorks, a leading business consultancy to mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Martin Eisert, a student at Carleton University who created a portable mixed reality device to help children with autism improve their social skills. Like this video if you enjoy our show, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Martin Eisert, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thanks for having me.
So Martin, it's a time of year where a lot of students are graduating. Are you still a student, or have you graduated?
I'm still going to be a student next year. I have 2 credits to fulfill, but I'm done the industrial design portion of my education for now.
So tell us about where you've gone to school, what you're studying, and how you got interested in it.
So I went to school at Carleton University in Ottawa. I took 5 years to fulfill that degree, but there was a gap year in the middle that I found very useful. I found industrial design through my neighbor, Steve Field. He's actually a professor there. He kind of guided me towards it a little bit. He kind of knew I was a tinkerer and interested in like taking apart my bike and fixing it back up. And he just said, well, there's a program that's all about figuring things out, fixing things, getting to the bottom of things. And I was really fortunate to find industrial design, because I think it's a perfect blend of all of the things that we talk about in terms of what the future problems are for a society, and it really like allows you to get all the tools you need to kind of tackle them in a very systematic way. So I was super pumped when I got in, and I had no regrets.
Oh, that sounds great. It sounds pretty cool too, especially, you talk about the future, and you talk about, the whole idea of taking things apart and putting them back together again. And I think the future is about taking things apart and putting it together very differently. So it seems like industrial design and the way that you've been taught to think is going to be pretty important in every field.
Yeah, for sure. We do talk a lot about interdisciplinary design and getting in touch with, people outside of the design field, because I think we all get taught in school to think a certain way. And what I really liked about design is that it's a lot more of a methodology instead of a theory. So it's kind of the steps how to solve rather than, this is like the A to Z, this is what you have to do. And so when you kind of have that like free flow of ideas coming in from all these different disciplines, I think you just get a lot of stronger outcomes and also like different perspectives that change the whole dynamic of the problem solving situation. For example, if you were to work on a park or something like that, you might want to talk to a sociologist to understand sort of the makeup of the community, and maybe an anthropologist could tell you about the history of the community and how the parks have been used in the past. And you could talk to a psychologist that could tell you about play and how to get children to collaborate and play together. So there's so many different ways to tackle the problem, not just, let's make the twisty slide go really, really fast. Um, that's what I love about design is it's never just a direct approach. There's always angles to attack the problem from.
I love that. And I love I think what you're talking about to me or talking about is actually maybe my favorite word in business or life in its context. It's understanding why something is happening, why we may need to make a decision, what are the different things that impact it. And I think that you're right in saying that that's lacking from a lot of straight on processes, where you are just told to go from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and people jump into ideation or brainstorming cold, and they put an idea on the wall, and they don't really take the time to figure out why it's happening. So it sounds like you learned a lot about asking why and what and how before you jump into solving anything.
Yeah, so like even just in the context of this last year for the capstone project, we have like a 4 month at the start of the semester or at the start of the year to really, it's called problem finding. So it's not enough to just say, this tackle, this is the issue I'm going to tackle. It's really about finding the latent needs of the users and kind of like digging underneath the surface and figuring out like what are the root causes of said problem. For me, I was like researching autism, and so there was a lot of just looking into like all the different therapies and methodologies and the history of technology being used to help support kids with autism. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later in the podcast, but just to say that I think a good designer is one who can find the right problem to solve and not just solve the problem the right way that they deem to be the most important problem.
I love that, finding the right problem to solve. So you mentioned autism. How did this become a focus of yours?
During the gap year that I talked about, I decided to go travel up north into the northern region of Quebec called Nunavik. And I was living in this small village called Kuujjuaq. I worked at the hospital first and realized it wasn't necessarily for me. There was a lot of, it's a hospital. There's things that go on that are kind of shocking sometimes. And so I decided, maybe I'll take the easy route and go work at the school. Well, that wasn't really the case. So I ended up getting a job they call it a shadow for a student with autism, and essentially it was just to be there to kind of support him if he has any like outbursts during the daytime, or if he tries to run away, I'd be the one to try and go catch him. And so that kind of relationship just started as a very like kind of a babysitter sort of relationship. And as we sort of started working more and more together, they realized like we had good communication between us, and so I kind of took on the role of being his educator as well. And that was like kind of really the eye-opening part for me, was just how there was such a lack of tools to help support his education, because he was really not coming at it from like a traditional like curriculum perspective. For him it was more about learning life skills, about learning the foundations of communication. So I felt frustrated, he felt frustrated, and when I came back to school to design my 4th year project, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. And the serendipitous moment was just realizing that, I had all this experience working with a child with autism, and I didn't want to put that experience away. It really did stick with me. And so I chose to use that as the kind of the motivator throughout the project. And yeah, I got into the autism sort of bubble and looking at all the different therapies like I talked about, and yeah, I came up with a project for the end of the year called Simplay.
So you said that you found that you had good communication, or there was good communication between the two of you. What is good communication?
Hmm. So for this child, he was pretty nonverbal. He could like utter certain things, utter like a string of words, but they weren't necessarily a sentence. And he had sort of pronunciation issues, so his P's were F's or his R's were L's sometimes, and it was just difficult for people right away to try and understand him. But the more time that we'd spent together, the more I recognized what those sounds meant. And he kind of built a trust with me too. So he knew that I was an adult in his life that he could depend on, and that would be there for him in those kind of tough situations in school. So I guess what I would say good communication is not necessarily just the back and forth dialogue, but it's a trust, it's a relationship, and it's kind of those like underlying, those looks that you give each other, the little eyebrow raises, the smiles, just to like communicate that you're listening or that they're being heard. Um, so that was kind of an experience myself because like I was very used to just talking and getting to know people through that kind of dialogue, but trying to understand what this child needed, what his hobbies were, what his passions were. That was kind of hard to do without getting to I get a direct answer from him. So it just took time. It takes time to build those relationships, those nonverbal relationships. But I find they're a lot more powerful sometimes, because you have that kind of, you don't need to tell each other, I love you, or you don't need to say to each other all the time, like, I trust you. You just know. And that was pretty special to sort of at the end, get a big hug and realize like I'd cracked the case, and we'd really formed that relationship. So that was
Uh,
pretty awesome.
yeah, it is awesome, and it's amazing how you grew that bond, and especially in a nonverbal relationship. That's amazing. So you come back, you've got your capstone project to do. It's called Simplay. Tell us a little bit about that and how you translated your experience into something much bigger.
So the Simply device here, this is the culmination of my 8 months of work. It's a camera and projector fusioned into one device. And through the back, this is the projector. Through the front, this is the camera. And essentially it would go against the wall and project images, graphics, and experiences that the child can then interact with through the camera at the front of the device. Um, so it's called a mixed reality device because instead of VR where you put on the headset and you kind of isolate yourself in that your own little bubble, or AR or augmented reality where you look through the phone, mixed reality is when you project the digital elements onto the physical space, and it really creates more of a shared experience for everybody who's involved. And I really like that option for therapy, especially because the therapist, the speech therapist, the parent, or the teacher can see what's going on the screen and actually like collaborate with this child while they're playing with it. That was essentially what Simplay does. And the goal of Simplay was to have those kind of more digital focused educational tools that it seemed like, at least for my kid that I was working with up north, he really connected with those digital tools. Like on the computer, he would play games. And it was really interesting because his focus while he was on the computer was very intense, and it was very clear that that was like the medium that really interested him the most. And then we'd have to sort of like try and do stuff on pen and paper, try and do the regular curriculum, and it just wasn't clicking as much. So I really like the idea that Simplay is in some ways a digital product because it is sort of displaying these like imaginary virtual things onto the environment, but at the same time, like because it's grounded in reality, because it's projected onto the wall, it kind of feels a little bit more tangible than just peering into a screen, which I thought was a good option because I know there's a lot of kids who just get put in front of the TV, and that kind of is like the main way that their parents sort of get that 5 minutes of relaxation for themselves, or like that's the way that they can know that the kid is sort of occupied. Um,
Yeah.
but I thought, what's the point of just making them watch SpongeBob if they could do something that's, play, interact with, learn from. So that was kind of the goal of Simplay.
You're projecting onto a wall or wherever it is. Are you projecting images that you talk to the child about, or just to see a reaction? Like, I'm trying to
Yeah.
understand.
So
Yeah,
okay. So like, thing about Simplay is it's really more of a medium for which people can build things onto. When I was starting my research into the whole autism space, I came across these places called sensory environments. And essentially, what they are is like these sort of somber-esque rooms with lighting, like neon lighting, or just sort of like colorful LED lighting, sensory objects to manipulate and play with. They could have projections on the walls. They could have, carpets with textures. And what they're really great at doing is sort of creating an engagement with the student and making them more aware of their senses, and it kind of heightens the education. But the problem with them is that they're so large, they're so vast. They take up a lot of resources in terms of the space and in terms of money. So Simplay was kind of trying to simplify what those sensory environments brought to education and sort of make them more portable and simplified. So the projection is kind of making up for all of those different sensory stimuli that would be available in those rooms. But really, what Simplay can do is it can track the motion and it can track the voice. So you can talk to the machine. So in one instance, it could be somebody simulating a conversation with an avatar, and you could like talk through scenarios. Like a common thing that therapists do with kids with autism is they'll run through short stories, maybe a 3-panel comic, and it's perhaps this one's about sharing. So Mikey wants to play with Tim and Duncan, and he just grabs the ball. How do you think Tim and Duncan will react if Mikey just grabs the ball without asking? And then you talk to the kid about, oh, would he be upset? Would he be happy? Would he be, frustrated? And you kind of play through the scenarios in order to kind of prepare them for day-to-day life. So that could be an example, is like playing through a scenario, but through the Simplay. So maybe it's a taking the bus routine, or it's brushing your teeth routine.
right.
Or it could be even, drawing in virtual space, using your fingers as like the paintbrush. So that was something that I was able to code for the demo at the grad show, and that was really a really popular activity that people like to do. There was one person's grandma who was like an artist back in, paintbrush and paint artist, but she got into it and she was really focused on getting the perfect image with her finger, and it was so cute to see her kind of, and that was the other thing that really struck me, is like how intuitive gestures are. People just instantly kind of grab them, versus trying to teach somebody how to use a controller, or how to teach somebody how to use a computer setup, keyboard and mouse. It was just gesture controlled, so it was really intuitive. So some of the activities could be dragging and dropping things, like matching. So happy face, the word happy, you can match those. It could be, finish the word, so put the word in order, like Canada, you can put the Canada. It could be, there's a whole variety of things. And what I
Right.
really felt like, for me at least, is I'm not an educator, I'm not a trained educator, I'm not a trained therapist. So to try and design a bunch of activities might be pointless, because there could be 100 activities on the Simplay device and none of them connect with that child in particular. So the goal was really to have it be sort of like an open source platform, where Simplay is the medium on which you can build these activities and these therapies, and then share them with the rest of the world and say, hey, this one really helped my child learn about sharing, or this one really helped my child with dinner routine, or something like that. And
It's
I think
it's
that's a
really
lot more
cool.
powerful.
Yeah, no, and it's really cool as you talk through it, because I mean, it seems to me like the applications in the long run are just massive. I mean, there's one obviously for obviously autism, but the whole notion of understanding gestures, of understanding motion, of understanding nonverbal communication, and to watch just about anybody learn or act or interact, it just, have you thought that far ahead? I mean, I know that you just got through your final,
Yeah.
your big presentation, so maybe not, but I'm sure at some point you've been thinking a little bit more. Somebody said, wow, there's a lot of application potential for this.
There was actually, and part of the whole design process is kind of realizing like, oh, this isn't just like, if you, let's say OXO is a great example of a company that I really admire because they were designing for the extremes. They decided to design something for arthritic hands, and the grip that they designed was just better for every scenario. So it's like if you design for the extremes, you can come out with a product or a solution that's really suitable for everybody, for the masses. So Simplay kind of had that same feeling. Sort of, I was looking into virtual conferencing and realized that you could have like this sort of life-size avatar of somebody projected onto the wall, and then have a conversation with them via the camera, sort of in like a more, I don't know, life-size, real, projected onto the environment. It's funny, when I was looking up projector and camera setups, there wasn't any sort of IP that had both combined. But what I did notice is like people that practiced hunting virtually, they would have sometimes a projector set up with like the forest scene and a high-speed camera that would record the barrel movement. And so I was like, oh, okay, so there's people using this sort of projector camera setup, but it's never been bundled and it's never been used for autism before. So that was kind of like the aha moment. But yeah, there's definitely so many more possibilities for the device. And that was kind of the fun part, is like once you knew, or once I kind of had that inkling that like, oh, there's something here, it was really easy to just kind of like fall down that rabbit hole and keep exploring all the possibilities. And sometimes it was hard to keep myself on track and be like, I know I have a focus. I have to like, finish the deliverables for this project, and all that stuff I can focus on a little bit later.
No, that's great. And have you thought of other? This is funny because I mean, earlier in the episode, I mean, I know you've got a dog there, and you put your dog outside, and I'm a dog lover as well, and she gets very annoyed when I don't pay attention to her and I work. Um, is there? I think it would be fascinating to watch and learn how animals learn as well. I mean, there's so much to do with training animals and see how they act and react and how they experience things. Are there applications outside of humans?
I don't know. I always call the window doggy TV for her because she's like just stares at it for 8 hours a day. So I think in terms of non-human applications, I never really thought about that possibility. But now that you say it, my mind's kind of starting to wander a little bit.
Yeah.
Like,
Anyway, I just
yeah.
just crossed my mind. But so what's up for you in the future? I mean, is Simplay a business or an opportunity you're going to look to develop? Are you going to continue, design? Like what is your future?
So Simplay, in terms of like the Simplay project, I feel like it has a lot of potential. I've gotten a lot of people asking me about patents. And like I actually got the chance to work as a patent drawer for a couple years. So I know a little bit about that world, and I know that there's a lot of money involved in terms of like not just filing your patent, but protecting your patent later on. So still kind of debating the patentability aspects of Simplay. But in terms of myself, I really did find that education, like when I was up north and I was working with the kids, it just brought me so much energy, and they had so many interesting questions, and it kind of like reignited that sort of childlike mind that I have. And so I think I'd like to focus on education, but perhaps maybe teach design to kids as like the third pillar of education. It's really a way of thinking. It's a methodology rather than a theory. And I think getting those ideas into kids' heads at a young age will bring so much more value to their lives. And even if they don't go into design, we talked about that interdisciplinary approach. And if they just kind of got the ideas like, oh, we need a little bit of this and we need a little bit of this, and together they make something more powerful. Or just to second guess your assumptions, or to ask the why question, but not once, not twice, not three times, but just keep asking until you get to those latent needs. Um, I got a chance to work at a summer camp called SHAD at Carlton. I was like the design coordinator there, and those were like 11, 12th grade students, and they were not from a design background, but over the course of the 1 month, we had them build a product, build a business, and bring that all to the, like, as a presentation at the end. And it was just incredible to see the evolution over 1 month of the way their thinking changed, how they approached ideas changed. The collaborative nature was really there at the end. So I think there's something really powerful in teaching design. I just don't know if maybe teachers college is the way to go about it, or trying to do a master's and see if I can get, weasel my way into the education system that way. It's definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot more, and especially since I've done this project, it's been something that I've kind of realized is a passion of mine and something that I want to pursue.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear, because I think, again, the way we think, I'm actually doing my doctorate in human ingenuity, so clever, inventive, original thinking. And a lot of what you're describing about design or design thinking and the asking the why, I mean, it's become so important, because we're dealing with ambiguity on a daily basis. Decades and decades ago, before I'm a little older than you, I mean, we things would roll out over a period of 1, 2, 3 years, and now things change so quickly that, to me, what you're saying is going to be an absolutely critical part of education, because things are going to change so quickly, or they are changing so quickly, so rapidly, that if you're not asking why, even if the answer is do nothing, you've at least asked the question and thought about something. So I think that's what you're really hitting on there, is we need to ask the questions more often.
Yeah, and I think, people will change careers a lot more often these days. And I think getting that kind of design background is like, one day we're designing air purifiers, and then the next we're designing toothbrush stands, and then the next we're designing Simplay, and it's like you're just going from all these different avenues of becoming like an expert, quote unquote, in any kind of project that you get. And I think that it's that versatility, it's that malleability of the designer that I find really impressive. And I think that we should kind of try and apply that to, a physicist, so that they're not so rigid in their thinking, or a musician, because like I did this project about systems thinking, and how there's a lack of cohesion in our systems. We have like the global system itself of shipping and moving things around the world, and then it gets like small into your community system, and who picks up the garbage, or who like runs the, and it just scales to like such a crazy size that like it's really hard sometimes to like think about an issue in terms of just being isolated in that one part of the system. And you gotta sort of consider how it's going to affect all the different cogs in the machine.
Yeah.
So getting that broad perspective, I think, is just invaluable for kids going forward, because it's just so much more connected now.
Well, Martin, as our time comes to a close this morning, one sort of last question that I'd like to just put out there, I mean, or insight. I mean, your project made the CBC. It was covered by the CBC in Canada, which is our national broadcaster for those listening to the show elsewhere. And you're still a student. I mean, how does that feel? And just tell us about that show and that experience, because that's a pretty incredible thing while you're still in university, to be honest.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Sort of like doing this though. This is pretty special too. So I mean, it all kind of started very nonchalant. My teacher sort of just mentioned my name and a bunch of students that he thought had good or like public speaking skills. And I got reached out to by a CBC journalist who sort of wrote like a brief description of my story. And they shared that, just kept going higher and higher up the ranks. And then eventually they said, you're going to be on Ottawa Morning. And I was like, wait, 91.5? Like, the actual radio that I listened to in my car, like and that was a shock. And then they said, oh yeah, and it's live, and I went, oh, okay. So I never done a live interview. I never been interviewed really before in my life. It was a bit overwhelming at first, the attention, but I think I'm really just happy to get the word out there about autism, and I wish more people would take the time to learn a little bit about autism, learn a little bit about communication, so that we can all kind of live together a little bit better. And I mean, it was just an honor, and it was a fun kind of 8-minute whirlwind. You start the interview, you're just blah blah blah, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, thanks for your time, and it's like, wow, that was it. That was amazing. Okay, well, there we go. So, yeah, it was really. I think I'll remember that moment probably for the rest of my life.
Good. And I hope you do. I think there's those moments in our lives that we have to take time to recognize how special they are. And it's been wonderful talking to you this morning, Martin, and just all the best of luck in your career.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's great talking to you too.
Bye.
Take care.